The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxurious penthouse apartment, but the light did nothing to warm the chill between the couple standing on opposite sides of the room. James, a self-made tech billionaire, stood with his hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at his wife of 7 years, Linda. "I don't understand," Linda whispered, her hands trembling as she held the divorce papers. "We built this life together. Everything we have, we created it as a team." Her voice cracked, but she held herself with dignity, just as she always had. Memories flooded through her mind. The tiny apartment they'd shared when James was still coding in their makeshift office, the countless nights she'd stayed up with him reviewing business plans, the simple gold ring she'd cherished when they couldn't afford anything fancy. She believed in him when no one else would. "Things change. People change," James replied flatly, though his fingers fidgeted with his designer watch, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. "I'm not the same person I was back then. Neither are you." The words sounded rehearsed, empty, like lines from a script he practiced in front of his bathroom mirror. The truth hung unspoken between them. Mia, the new PR executive at his company, had caught his eye 3 months ago. Young, vibrant, and understanding of his new lifestyle in a way Linda supposedly wasn't. At least, that's what he convinced himself. Linda walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city bustled with morning traffic, people rushing about their lives, unaware of how quickly a seemingly perfect world could crumble. "When did money change you so much?" she asked softly, not really expecting an answer. "This isn't about money," James protested, but they both knew better. The private jets, the yacht parties, the endless social events. He'd grown addicted to a lifestyle that Linda had never cared for. While she still preferred quiet evenings at home and genuine conversations, he'd become obsessed with maintaining an image. "Remember when we used to dream about making it big?" Linda turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You said we'd change the world together. Help people. Make a difference." She laughed quietly, but there was no joy in the sound. "I guess your definition of making it changed somewhere along the way." James shifted uncomfortably, his custom-made suit suddenly feeling too tight. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, but he pushed aside the guilt. In his mind, he deserved this new life, this fresh start. He deserved someone who could be the perfect trophy wife, someone who understood the importance of appearances in his world of tech billionaires and startup unicorns. "The lawyers will handle everything," he said briskly, checking his phone to avoid seeing the pain in her eyes. "You'll be taken care of financially." As if money could patch the hole he was tearing in their shared history. Linda placed the divorce papers on their marble dining table, the same table where they'd once shared midnight snacks during their startup days. "Keep your money," she said quietly. "I helped build your empire, but I never needed it. I only needed you." She walked past him toward their bedroom, her head held high despite her breaking heart. James watched her go, ignoring the small voice in his head that screamed he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Instead, he thought of Mia waiting for him at their secret meeting spot, of the exciting future ahead with someone who represented everything his new world stood for. What he didn't know was that Linda carried a secret of her own, one that would change everything in the years to come. But for now, she would face this ending with the same grace and strength that had helped her build a billionaire from the ground up. The divorce papers were still fresh when Linda disappeared from the glittering world of Silicon Valley. She packed her life into 3 suitcases, leaving behind the mansion that had never really felt like home. Her closest friend, an elderly neighbor who'd become like a mother to her, was the only one who knew where she was heading. A quiet suburb of Boston where her grandmother's old house stood waiting. What she didn't tell anyone, not even her trusted friend, was the news she confirmed just days before James dropped his bombshell. 4 tiny heartbeats had shown up on the ultrasound screen, a miracle that had left even her doctor speechless. Quadruplets. Linda kept this secret close to her heart, like a precious flame she needed to protect. Meanwhile, James's new life exploded across social media. His wedding to Mia became the talk of the tech world, a 3-day extravaganza on a private island. Pictures flooded the internet. Mia in her designer gown, celebrities mingling with tech giants, fireworks painting the sky. Each image felt like a small knife in Linda's heart, but she focused on the future growing inside her instead. "Mrs. Chen, these readings are perfect," her new doctor in Boston would say during her weekly checkups. Linda had chosen to keep her married name, not for James, but for the babies she carried. She spent her days preparing the old house, turning the spacious rooms that had once hosted her childhood memories into a home for four. Back in Silicon Valley, James's fairy tale began showing its first cracks, though he refused to see them. Mia's shopping sprees made headlines, her demands for attention growing with each passing week. "You're always working," she'd complain, pouting in a way James once found charming but now seemed childish. "We never spend any quality time together anymore." Life had different plans for Linda. Morning sickness hit her hard, but she never complained. She found peace in fixing up her grandmother's garden, planting new life in the rich soil while her babies grew. The neighbors, curious but kind, brought her casseroles and offered help without asking too many questions about her past. One evening, as Linda sat on her porch watching the sunset, she felt the first kicks. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she placed her hands on her growing belly. "You're not alone," she whispered to her unborn children. "You'll never be alone." The tabloids couldn't get enough of James and Mia's story. "Tech billionaire's wife dazzles at charity gala," the headlines screamed. But behind the perfect photos, James found himself working later and later, avoiding the emptiness of his new home. Something was missing, though he couldn't admit what or who it was. Linda's doctor visits became more frequent as her pregnancy progressed. 4 healthy boys, the doctor announced during one ultrasound. Linda watched the screen in wonder as her sons moved and kicked, already showing their unique personalities. She could swear one was doing somersaults while another seemed to be sucking his thumb. As her due date approached, Linda transformed the master bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls herself in soft blues and greens. She chose names carefully, traditional names that carried strength and meaning. Not once did she think about calling James, about sharing this miracle with him. He'd made his choice, and she'd made hers. The seasons changed, and with them, Linda's body grew and adapted. She took photos of her progress, keeping a diary for her sons to read someday. "Your story begins with love," she wrote, "and that's all that matters." What she didn't know was that fate had its own plans. In just a few years, the careful walls she built around her new life would crack, bringing her face to face with the past she thought she'd left behind. But for now, in her grandmother's house filled with the promise of new life, Linda found something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. 4 years flew by like pages in a storybook. Linda's grandmother's house, once quiet and filled with shadows of the past, now buzzed with the joyful chaos of 4 identical little boys. Their laughter echoed through the halls, turning the old home into a playground of endless adventures. The boys, Alex, Ben, Charlie, and David, were perfect mirrors of their father, though they'd never met him. Each had those striking honey-colored eyes that seemed to change with their moods, and the same dimple on their left cheek when they smiled. But their hearts, those were all Linda's. "Mommy, look what I found." Alex, the oldest by 2 minutes, came running in from the garden, holding up a caterpillar. His brothers crowded around, their little faces full of wonder. Linda watched them, her heart swelling with love. These moments made all the sleepless nights and challenges of raising quadruplets worth it. Her children's clothing boutique, Little Treasures, had become the talk of the neighborhood. Linda had started small, selling handmade clothes from a tiny shop. Now, 4 years later, her designs were sought after by parents across the city. She'd found her calling in creating comfortable, stylish clothes that could withstand the energy of active children, something she knew plenty about. "Mrs. Chen, these new designs are fantastic," her shop manager would say, watching customers flock to the latest collection. Linda had poured her creativity into the business, using it as both an outlet and a way to build a secure future for her boys. Every morning was like a carefully choreographed dance. Getting 4 4-year-olds ready for preschool might have overwhelmed some, but Linda had it down to an art. "Okay, troops," she'd call out, and her little army would line up, each knowing their morning routine by heart. Ben, the most organized of the 4, would help his brothers find their shoes. Charlie, the comedian, would make everyone laugh with his silly breakfast faces. David, the quiet observer, would make sure nobody forgot their favorite toy for show and tell. They worked together like a tiny, well-oiled machine. The local park became their weekend sanctuary. Linda would watch her boys climb, slide, and chase each other, their energy seemingly endless. Other parents often asked if they were a handful, but Linda would just smile. After everything she'd been through, this chaos was her paradise. "Mommy, will we ever have a daddy?" Charlie asked one evening during story time. The question pierced Linda's heart, but she kept her voice steady. "You have me, and I have you. We're a team, remember?" The boys nodded, snuggling closer as she continued reading their favorite book. The boutique thrived under Linda's careful attention. She'd created a children's clothing line that celebrated comfort and durability while looking stylish enough for special occasions. Her understanding of what parents needed, especially those with active children, made her designs stand out. Each boy showed unique talents as they grew. Alex was the natural leader, always looking out for his brothers. Ben could solve puzzles meant for older kids. Charlie could make anyone smile on their worst day, and David had already shown incredible artistic ability, filling notebooks with colorful drawings. Linda kept a special box hidden in her closet, filled with newspaper clippings about James's success and various tech innovations. Not for herself, but for the day her sons might ask about their father. They deserved to know their history, even if it was bittersweet. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Morning rushes to preschool, afternoons at the boutique, while the boys played in the special kids' corner she'd designed, evenings filled with homework, baths, and bedtime stories. It wasn't the life she'd planned years ago, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. What Linda didn't know was that their peaceful world was about to change. Soon, the careful walls she'd built around her family would face their biggest test. But for now, she was content watching her four miracles grow, their father's features becoming more pronounced each day, while their hearts grew stronger with her love and guidance. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons, even to those who seem to have everything. James stood at the window of his massive office, looking out at the city skyline but not really seeing it. His company was facing its biggest challenge yet. A rival tech firm had developed something that could make his main product obsolete. "Your wife is online free," his assistant called through the intercom. James sighed. These days, Mia only called about two things, money or complaints. He let it ring, just like he'd been doing more and more lately. The perfect life he'd imagined with Maya had started showing cracks almost immediately after their honeymoon. What he'd once seen as youthful enthusiasm now felt like immaturity. Her constant social media updates, the endless shopping sprees, the demand for attention, it all felt hollow. Last night's dinner party had been the final straw. While trying to discuss the company's challenges with potential investors, Mia had interrupted repeatedly with stories about her latest shopping trip to Paris. The investors' polite smiles couldn't hide their discomfort. "Remember to book the yacht for next weekend," Mia's voice message played later. "All my followers are expecting photos from my birthday cruise." James deleted the message, remembering simpler times when celebrations meant something real. His thoughts drifted to Linda more often these days. He remembered how she'd sit with him during tough times, offering practical solutions or just quiet support. She'd understood the difference between showing off wealth and building something meaningful. The company's problems grew worse. A major investor pulled out, spooked by rumors about the rival's new technology. The board called emergency meetings. Through it all, Mia's only concern was whether this would affect her monthly shopping allowance. "You've changed," she told him one evening, pouting as she scrolled through her phone. "You're no fun anymore. All you do is work and worry." James wanted to explain that running a billion-dollar company wasn't about having fun, but he knew she wouldn't understand. Late at night, alone in his home office, James found himself looking at old photos. One showed him and Linda celebrating when they got their first small office space. Her smile was genuine, her joy real. They'd shared pizza on a cardboard box that night, dreaming about the future. The contrast with his current life hit him hard. His massive mansion felt empty despite its expensive furnishings. Maya spent most of her time either shopping or at spas, claiming she needed to maintain her image as a billionaire's wife. "The board needs an answer by Monday," his VP of technology reminded him. The company needed innovation, fresh ideas, the kind of creative thinking that had made them successful in the first place. James realized he'd lost touch with that part of himself somewhere between the yacht parties and charity galas. A video popped up on his phone, Mia's latest social media post. She was showing off their house to her followers, treating their home like a museum exhibit. The comments praised her lifestyle, but James felt sick watching it. When had his life become more about showing off and creating value? Walking through their massive kitchen one morning, he found a note from Mia. She'd flown to Milan for an emergency shopping trip with her friends. Emergency shopping, the phrase would have made him laugh if it didn't make him want to cry. The breakfast table felt enormous with just him sitting there. He remembered weekend breakfasts with Linda, how they'd dream up new ideas over coffee and bagels. She'd challenge his thinking, push him to be better. Mia just pushed him to buy better things. As his company's stock price dropped and the pressure mounted, James finally faced the truth. He'd thrown away something real for something that just looked good in pictures. What he didn't know was that life was about to throw him another curveball, one that would force him to confront everything he'd been trying to forget. The crisp Boston morning brought James to a small but elegant shopping district far from his usual luxury malls back home. His niece's birthday was coming up, and his sister had specifically requested something unique, not just another expensive toy. A quaint children's boutique caught his eye, its window displayed featuring beautifully crafted clothes that somehow reminded him of simpler times. A bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door. The shop had a warm, welcoming feel, nothing like the cold, high-end stores Maya frequented. The sound of children's laughter drifted from somewhere in the back, making him smile despite himself. "I'll be right with you," a familiar voice called out, stopping his heart mid-beat. Before he could process why that voice affected him so deeply, the sound of running feet and giggling grew closer. Around the corner came not one, not two, but 4 identical little boys, racing each other with paper airplanes. James felt the world tilt beneath his feet. These boys, around 4 or 5 years old, had his eyes, his dimples, the way the smallest one furrowed his brow. It was like looking in a mirror of his childhood photos. His knees felt weak as understanding crashed over him. "Alex, Ben, please don't run in the..." Linda's voice trailed off as she emerged from the back room. She froze, her face going pale as their eyes met across the store. The boys, oblivious to the tension, continued their game around them. "Linda," he whispered, his voice barely working. His eyes darted between her and the boys, who were now curiously looking at this stranger who seemed so interested in them. One of them, he couldn't tell which, stepped forward, examining James with intelligent eyes that matched his own. "Are you a customer?" the bold little boy asked, while another hid shyly behind Linda's legs. James couldn't speak, couldn't move. His mind was racing, calculating dates, remembering their last moments together. Linda quickly gathered herself, years of practice helping her maintain composure. "Boys, why don't you go play in the reading corner? Mommy needs to talk to this gentleman." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress. The children obediently headed to their play area, though they kept glancing back curiously. James watched them go, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "There," he couldn't finish the sentence. "Mine," Linda said firmly, but her eyes softened slightly. "Ours," she amended quietly. "Alex, Ben, Charlie, and David. There'll be 5 next month." James sank into a nearby chair, his legs no longer able to hold him. 5 years. His sons were almost 5 years old, and he hadn't known they existed. He'd been posting about yacht parties and attending tech conferences, while his children were taking their first steps. "Why didn't you?" he began, but Linda cut him off with a look that held years of hurt and protective love. "You made your choice," she said simply. "I made mine." They've never lacked for love or anything else they needed. As if to prove her point, one of the boys called out, "Mommy, look what I drew," holding up a colorful picture. Linda's face transformed with love as she glanced at her son, and James saw what he truly walked away from, not just a wife who loved him, but a family that could have been his whole world. The weight of his choices pressed down on him like a physical thing. While he'd been chasing what he thought was happiness with Maya, his own flesh and blood had been growing up without him. The toys they loved, their first words, their favorite foods, he knew none of it. What he did know, looking at these four beautiful boys who carried his features but Linda's strength, was that his life would never be the same again. The question was, what would he do with this earth-shattering discovery? Linda closed the shop early that day. The boys were safely occupied at their regular afternoon art class, giving the former couple the space they needed for a conversation that was 5 years overdue. They sat in the small office at the back of the boutique, the air heavy with unspoken words. "How could you keep this from me?" James's voice shook with a mix of anger and pain. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Then my sons too. I had a right to know." Linda took a slow sip of her tea, her calm exterior masking the storm of emotions inside. "Did I? You made it very clear that your new life didn't include me. Should I have turned our children into a bargaining chip? Used them to force my way back into your world?" Her words hit him like a physical blow. Images of the past 5 years flashed through his mind, the extravagant parties, the yacht trips, the endless social media posts. All of it felt meaningless now, knowing what he'd missed. "They're so beautiful," he whispered, his anger melting into something closer to grief. "Alex, he has my mother's smile, and the way Ben tilts his head when he's thinking. I used to do that as a kid." "Charlie's the comedian," Linda offered softly. "He makes up songs about everything. David's our artist. He can spend hours drawing. They're all so different, yet so alike." Her voice carried the pride and love of a mother who'd poured her whole heart into raising her children. James leaned forward, running his hands through his hair. Do they ever ask about me?" Linda's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes. I keep a box of news articles about you. I've never lied to them, but I've waited until they're old enough to understand. They know their daddy is a busy man who builds things that help people." The simplicity of her explanation made his chest ache. While he'd been chasing bigger deals and bigger headlines, she'd been protecting their sons' hearts, giving them a foundation of love and understanding. "I want to be part of their lives," he said suddenly firmly. "I know I don't deserve it, but they deserve to know their father. Please, Linda." She studied him carefully, years of protective instinct warring with her natural fairness. "This isn't about you or me anymore. It's about them. If you want to be in their lives, it has to be for real. No flying visits between business deals. No expensive gifts to make up for missed moments." "I'll move my company's East Coast office to Boston," he said without hesitation. "I'll buy a house nearby. Whatever it takes." Linda held up her hand. "Slow down. You can't just burst into their lives with grand gestures. They need time to adjust. We need to do this right." Her voice held the wisdom of someone who'd put her children's needs first for years. Just then, they heard the shop's bell ring, the art teacher bringing the boys back. Their excited voices carried through the store, discussing their paintings and clay creations. "Mummy, teacher says I'm getting really good at drawing dogs," David's voice called out. Linda stood up, straightening her dress. "We'll talk more later. For now, let's just take it slow." They're sensitive boys. They notice everything. James nodded, understanding the gift she was offering. A chance to know his sons, but on terms that protected their well-being. As he watched Linda go out to greet their children, he realized something profound. While he'd spent years building a business empire, she'd been building something far more precious, a family filled with love, trust, and understanding. The sound of his son's laughter echoed through the store, a reminder of all he'd missed and all he hoped to discover. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, James felt like he was facing the right direction. Life has a way of coming full circle. Just as James was discovering his sons, his perfectly crafted world with Mia began its final collapse. He returned to his hotel room after meeting Linda and the boys to find dozens of missed calls from his office. A video had gone viral, Mia at a private yacht party with a young tech startup founder looking very much in love. "It's not what it looks like," Mia's voice message pleaded, but they both knew it was exactly what it looked like. The irony wasn't lost on James. He'd left Linda for a younger woman, and now that same story was playing out again, with him in a different role. The business news channels buzzed with speculation. Tech billionaire's wife caught in scandal flashed across screens everywhere. James watched the headlines with strange detachment, his mind still filled with images of 4 little boys playing with paper airplanes. I think it's best if I move out, Mia announced 2 days later, not looking particularly upset. Thomas's company is really taking off, and he understands me better. Thomas, the startup founder, was 28, fresh-faced, and riding his first wave of success. James saw his younger self in the man's ambitious eyes. While movers packed up Mia's designer clothes and endless shoe collection, James sat in his home office looking at photos Linda had shared of the boy's early years. First steps, first words, first day of press school, all captured in her careful photographs. His chest ached with each swipe of his phone. The press is asking for a statement about Mia, his PR team informed him. James just shook his head. Let them talk. For the first time in years, he had more important things to think about than his public image. He found himself driving to Boston every weekend, renting a small apartment near Linda's neighborhood. The boys were slowly getting used to his presence, though they still called him Mr. James, a name that both hurt and felt right for now. Want to see my dinosaur collection? Charlie asked one Saturday, starting to warm up to this new person in their lives. James spent the next hour learning more about pterodactyls than he ever known, watching his son's eyes light up with excitement. The divorce papers from Mia arrived without fanfare. She wanted a settlement that would keep her in the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. James signed without arguing. Money seemed less important now that he knew what real wealth looked like. 4 little boys sharing a cookie, giggling over some secret joke. Linda watched it all from a careful distance, protective but fair. She saw how James sat patiently while Ben explained his complex Lego structures, how he listened intently to Alex's detailed stories about school, how he admired David's endless artwork. "You're different with them," she observed one evening as James prepared to leave after dinner with the boys. "More like the person I used to know." The media frenzy over his divorce eventually died down. The business papers wrote about his company's latest innovations instead of his personal life. But James barely noticed. His focus had shifted to learning the simple things, what each boy liked for breakfast, their favorite bedtime stories, the special way each one needed to be hugged when they were sad. "My daddy knows how to make paper airplanes that do loops," he overheard Charlie telling a friend one day. The word daddy hit him like a wave, bringing tears he quickly wiped away. Through it all, he began to understand what Linda had known all along, that true happiness wasn't found in yacht parties or magazine covers, but in the small moments that made up a family's life. His expensive suits gathered dust while his casual clothes showed signs of playground adventures and art project mishaps. The man who had once abandoned love for status was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who measured wealth in bedtime stories and crayon drawings. It wasn't easy, and he had years of absence to make up for, but for the first time since he built his empire, James felt truly rich. The seasons changed slowly, marking time as James worked to build relationships with his sons. Every small victory felt huge. The first time Alex asked for help with his homework, the morning Ben waited by the window for his Saturday visit, the way Charlie started saving jokes just to tell him, "Dad, can you come to our school play?" David asked one afternoon, holding out a crumpled permission slip. It was the first time any of them had called him Dad directly, and James had to turn away to hide his tears. Linda, arranging flowers nearby, pretended not to notice, but her small smile showed she understood the moment's importance. James rearranged his entire business schedule around the school play. His assistant was shocked when he cancelled a major investor meeting, but James didn't hesitate. "My sons are performing in the 3 Little Pigs. Well, 4 little pigs in our version," he explained proudly. The school gymnasium was packed with parents holding phones and cameras. James sat next to Linda, both of them beaming as their boys took the stage. Each one had a different way of delivering their lines. Alex confident and clear, Ben precise and careful, Charlie adding funny faces that made the audience laugh, and David putting his whole heart into every word. They'd practiced their lines for weeks, Linda whispered as they watched. David redesigned all their costumes too. James nodded, his chest tight with pride and a lingering sadness for all the moments he'd missed. At work, pictures of his sons slowly replaced the modern art on his office walls. His colleagues noticed the change in him, how he left meetings on time now, how he seemed more grounded, more human. The billion-dollar deals still mattered, but they weren't everything anymore. Linda's boutique became his favorite place to work remotely. He'd set up his laptop in the quiet back office, listening to the distant sounds of children trying on clothes and parents discussing sizes. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of his boys helping customers, already learning the value of hard work from their mother. "Why did you go away before?" Ben asked him one day, his young face serious. The question James had been dreading finally came during a quiet moment of building with Legos. He put down the brick he was holding and took a deep breath. "I made a big mistake," James answered honestly. "I thought things I could buy were more important than the people I loved. I was wrong, and I'm very sorry." Ben studied him for a long moment before picking up another Lego piece. "Mom says everyone makes mistakes," Ben said finally. "She says what matters is learning from them." James looked up to see Linda standing in the doorway, and their eyes met in a moment of understanding. The boys' education fund grew quietly in the background. James worked with Linda to set up trusts for each of them, ensuring their future was secure without spoiling their present. They agreed that the boys should grow up understanding the value of work and kindness, just as Linda had been teaching them all along. "Look what I made for you," David said one afternoon, handing James a carefully drawn picture. It showed 6 figures, 4 small ones, and 2 big ones, all holding hands. Above them, in wobbly letters, it read, "My family." James had billion-dollar contracts framed in his office, but this drawing became his most precious possession. Time moved forward, healing old wounds and building new connections. James learned to measure success differently, not in stock prices or market shares, but in bedtime stories read, skinned knees bandaged, and small hands held. He still ran his company, but now he also ran alongside 4 little boys in the park, teaching them to fly kites and catch balls. The path of redemption wasn't always smooth, but every step brought him closer to the man he should have been all along. In trying to be worthy of his son's love, James found himself becoming worthy of his own respect too. 2 years passed like pages turning in a storybook. The old mansion that Linda had made into a home now regularly echoed with the sound of not just 4 little boys, but also their father's laughter. James had kept his promise, moving most of his business operations to Boston, making sure he was there for every important moment and even the not-so-important ones. "Daddy, watch this." Charlie called out one sunny Sunday afternoon in their backyard. The boys, now 7, were showing off their newly learned bicycle skills. Linda stood on the porch, sipping tea and watching as James ran alongside David's wobbly bike, holding the seat until the little boy found his balance. The boutique had grown into a successful chain across New England, though Linda kept the original store as her main base. She'd refused James's offers to invest, proud of building something entirely her own. But she smiled when he brought coffee during busy days, or helped the boys organize the storage room. "Mom says you used to make computers before we were born," Alex said during dinner one evening. "Can you teach us?" James looked at Linda, who nodded slightly. That weekend, he started teaching all 4 boys basic coding, watching in amazement as they absorbed information like little sponges. The relationship between James and Linda had evolved into something neither of them expected. A friendship built on mutual respect and their shared love for their sons. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into wisdom that made them better parents. "I never thanked you," James told Linda one quiet evening as they watched the boys doing homework, "for raising them to be such incredible people, for not letting my mistakes affect how they see the world." Linda's eyes softened. "They get their kindness from both of us, you know. You just needed time to remember who you really were." Their co-parenting schedule had become natural and fluid. James hosted weekly science experiment nights at his house nearby, while Linda continued their tradition of Friday movie nights. The boys moved between both homes easily, secure in the knowledge that they were loved in both places. "Look what we made," Ben exclaimed one day, proudly showing off a computer game the 4 brothers had created together. It was simple but clever, just like them. James hung their first software project certificate in his office, right next to David's latest artwork and Charlie's story about a friendly dragon. The media eventually lost interest in the billionaire who'd chosen family over glamour. Sometimes old pictures of his life with Maya would surface online, but they felt like scenes from someone else's life. His new social media, managed by Charlie, was full of science projects, football games, and 4 identical grins. "You know, Linda said during their son's school graduation ceremony, "They turned out pretty amazing, didn't they?" James nodded, too choked up to speak as they watched their boys accept awards for everything from art to mathematics. The boys grew into their own personalities while maintaining their incredible bond. Alex became the group's natural leader, Ben the thoughtful problem solver, Charlie kept his sense of humor while showing a talent for public speaking, and David's artistic skills blossomed into true talent. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, disagreements, and challenges, but they faced them together as a family. The empire James had built seemed small compared to the joy of teaching his sons about life, learning from their innocent wisdom, and watching them grow. "Do you ever regret it?" his business partner asked one day, referring to his simpler life in Boston. James looked out his office window, where he could see his 4 boys playing in the park across the street, their laughter carrying up to him on the breeze. "The only regret I have," he answered honestly, "is that it took me so long to understand what real wealth looks like." His eyes drifted to a family photo on his desk, 4 identical boys with his eyes and Linda's smile, all of them surrounded by love that no amount of money could buy. The story that began with a billionaire's mistake had transformed into something much more valuable, a tale of redemption, second chances, and the true meaning of success. In the end, James hadn't just found his way back to his family, he'd found his way back to himself.